BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Wednesday, time for the AMA. Welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking all about the Zodiac Killer suspect Ross Sullivan, and I have two quick announcements before we begin. The first is that this is a topic that was requested by one of the listeners, giving a shout out to YouTube user YYJJ, who wrote, "Great as always, Ned. I would love some more videos about Ross Sullivan as the Zodiac. Cheers from Argentina." And thank you for this suggestion, and as you see, if anyone else has an idea for something they would like covered on the channel, please put your idea in the comments section below, your suggested topic, and I will try to get to it. I'm trying to do as many of the requests as I can right now, and I thought that this would be a good opportunity to do an episode on Ross Sullivan, because there are numerous episodes about Ross Sullivan all over the internet. There are about at least 3 here dedicated solely to him on Black Box Online Radio. But I thought we could expand upon some of that information as well as going through some new material. And I said that there were 2 announcements. The next one is going to be a shout out to someone who has written into the episode on Michael O'Hare and the murder of Joan Webster, and she is none other than Eve Carson, who is perhaps one of the leading authorities on the murder of Joan Webster from 1981. And when you look at Gareth Penn's book, Time 17, and it talks about the Zodiac Killer murders from 1966 to 1981, Gareth Penn is perhaps the most famous person who was trying to connect the Zodiac Killer to the murder of Joan Webster. Joan Webster was Eve Carson's sister-in-law, and Eve Carson went on to write a book about her called Mommy's a Mole, which is available on Amazon.com. And I would just like to read off Eve Carson's comment here, and being clear, this is not connected to Ross Sullivan, just giving a shout out to Eve for writing into the channel. And she says, "2 individuals knew the correct manner of Joan Webster's death more than 7 years before her remains surfaced. Andrew Palumbo and Carmen Tamaro. Both were MSP officers integral in the Joan Webster investigation. 4 people promoted the boat theory. That's that Joan Webster was buried at sea, but of course her remains were found on land. What actually happened was, if you haven't heard that episode yet, it's called Michael O'Hare and the Murder of Joan Webster, available on Black Box Online Radio, but someone was just out walking her dog and saw something in the woods that she didn't recognize, so she walked more closely and realized that it was a human skull, and it turned out that it was the skull of Joan Webster. 4 people promoted the boat theory, ignoring the evidence in their possession: Palumbo, Tamaro, Tim Burke, and George Webster. Spreading false information left a void for other theories to emerge. There is no evidence in source documents that connects Joan's murder to the Zodiac crimes, Gareth Penn, or Michael O'Hare. It was a distraction, a confusing and legitimate one, and it messed up the legitimate investigation. This was a cover-up." A big thank you to Eve Carson for writing into the show one more time. Her book is called Mommy's a Mole, about the murder of Joan Webster, and as you heard very clearly, she does not believe that it was connected to the Zodiac Killer. And to the credit of Joe from Zodiac Killer Insights, the Zodiac Killer Insights series, he has an excellent video on the murder of Joan Webster. But when I talked about this particular murder with him, he says very clearly, even with his suspect, Gareth Penn, he cannot connect Gareth Penn to the crime scene. Instead, he says that it's possible, it's a maybe that Gareth Penn was involved. And there was a composite sketch released of an individual that was seen at Logan Airport nearby Joan Webster, and it does resemble the facial structure of Gareth Penn a lot. But other than that, that's really just all there is. But you've heard Eve Carson's words right there. She does not believe that her sister-in-law was murdered by the Zodiac, and Michael O'Hare adamantly denied any involvement in the murder of Joan Webster. I just wanted to thank Eve Carson for listening to the channel and writing in. Always nice when published authors check out the show. Okay, so on to the material about Ross Sullivan. Ross Sullivan is a Zodiac killer suspect that received an enormous amount of attention, partially because he was featured on the History Channel's show, The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, and I saw my first episodes of that one. I've never really watched it because I thought it was going to be very mainstream, it was going to be very watered down, and last night I watched 2 episodes of that, although I was jumping around with the time frame a little bit, almost like the old-fashioned version of fast forwarding, because I really wanted to hear what they had to say about Ross Sullivan as a Zodiac killer suspect. And you are going to find that Sullivan is someone who is not only going to be beginning with these canonical Zodiac crimes in 1968. Most people want to start talking about Ross Sullivan in 1966 with the murder of Sherry Jo Bates at RCC. And in fact, if it weren't for the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, I don't think Ross Sullivan would be a Zodiac killer suspect at all, because Ross was in the RCC library at the time. He worked there. He went to RCC as a student, on and off for some previous years before that, and even it's just, how would you have Ross as the suspect if it weren't for the possible Zodiac victim, Sherry Jo Bates, who was murdered on October 30th of 1966? Now, with the beginning, I would actually like to go back just a little bit further to 1963, specifically June 4th of 1963, to talk about the Gaviota Beach murders, the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. On the Zodiac Killer channel here on YouTube, there's a video called Was Sandy the Zodiac, talking all about the Gaviota Beach murders, and they concluded that video with a question. Was this committed by an early Ross Sullivan? Like, was this the early works of a murderous Ross Sullivan? I'm paraphrasing, of course, but there was a question about that at the end. The problem with that is, I used to be very critical of people who couldn't find a good explanation about how they could get their suspect to the crime scene, but when I talk to the guys in the interviews, they say very simply, well, that's why it's an unsolved case. I mean, if we could place one individual at all these different crime scenes, even including Gaviota, Riverside, Lake Herman Road, and so on, then the case would be solved and this person would have been convicted. This is an unsolved series of homicides. But the problem is not only getting Sullivan to the crime scene, there's a bigger problem. How do you even place him in Gaviota State Park or Santa Barbara or any of the local areas, Lompoc even? In 1963, Ross should have been in Riverside, California. And when we did the episode on this channel, Ross Sullivan Timeline, in 1961, Ross started at the RCC, that's the Riverside City College, and then it's actually at the point when he starts bragging about being confined to a mental institution. And I would like to read our first comment that is going to come to us from Classic Chevy Cat Black, who says, you said he bragged about being in a mental institution. You would think if he was the Zodiac Killer at some point in his life, he would have bragged to someone about that. Possibly towards the end of his life. Believe me, most people know when they're starting to become unhealthy so that they could possibly pass away. He's definitely not my top suspect. I agree with you. Ross being out of control, but the Zodiac was in control. Okay, there are two big things that I want to say in this comment here. First, thank you, Chevy Cat Black, for the comment. And with this one, he is bragging about being in a mental institution. I was over on ZodiacCiphers.com earlier, and if you don't read the articles on ZodiacCiphers.com and you're following the Zodiac Killer mystery, I hope you will start. That's an excellent website. I love the way that they're written and structured. And there was one there that was saying that bragging about being in a mental institution does not mean that this person is a murderer. It does not mean that he committed the murder of Sherry Jo Bates or the murders of Domingos and Edwards. If anything, if you look at the Gaviota Beach murders, that's a double homicide that took place in a town where Ross Sullivan wasn't living, where he wasn't present. And that's just something I wanted to share about that. But here's something from the episode Ross Sullivan Timeline, available here on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. I'll reread Chevy Cat Black's comment. To become so unhealthy they could possibly pass away, he's definitely not my top suspect. I agree with you about Ross being out of control, but the Zodiac in control. At one point in Ross's life, he had somewhat of an episode where he was running around naked outside and he trapped a man in a phone booth. And what I said was, that's obnoxious. I mean, of course, Ross was having a schizophrenic episode, and most people would not refer to schizophrenics as obnoxious. They would use other terms like mentally ill. But I was like, this is some uncontrolled, out of his mind behavior. The Zodiac seemed like someone who was very controlled, methodical, and calculating. And I definitely have to retract my statement. I mean, yes, of course, somebody can be. I mean, they can have an episode like that, but the whole point with Ross Sullivan is he wasn't acting that way all the time. And I definitely made an overreach, or I said something that I believed to be true at the time. And it's possible, but I just want to be clear that I can't state something like that as a universal truth, that Ross Sullivan was out of control and the Zodiac was controlled. But those are some points that I also would like to expand upon, because I wanted to do an episode about this, but Drew Beeson beat me to it, and he perhaps maybe did it in an even better fashion on his channel. Drew Beeson, his show is called the Zodcast. I think it was episode 16, but maybe episode 15. Anyway, it's best to listen to the Zodcast in order they're arranged numerically. And I wanted to do an episode on that arrest of Ross Sullivan, like just the whole episode dedicated to that. And the point is that when Ross Sullivan was arrested, like, Drew found the newspaper article that detailed him and listed his weight as 300 pounds. And then Drew went on to say that the footprints that were recovered from Lake Berryessa after the stabbing of Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were estimated to have been made by a person who was 200 to 220 pounds. So that might mean that Ross Sullivan was too big to be the Zodiac killer, but I want to be very clear. In terms of having this schizophrenic, out-of-control episode where he's running around naked outside, traps a man in a telephone booth, those are things like disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, indecent exposure. Those would have been the reasons why he would have been arrested, or some similar phrasing in the charges. I had another reversal on that subject, and I was heavily influenced by Mark Hewitt, whom I've talked to and I've interviewed him for the channel. And Mark Hewitt proposed his suspect, Theodore Kaczynski, who was given the provisional diagnosis of being a paranoid schizophrenic. And I simply had to think more about the Zodiac killer mystery, and is it possible that the Zodiac was a high-functioning paranoid schizophrenic, whether your suspect is Ross Sullivan, Ted Kaczynski, or anybody else? Is it possible that they were a high-functioning paranoid schizophrenic? And I asked this question because, well, I mean, I've just listed two of the prime suspects, two suspects that have received an enormous amount of attention and scrutiny, and they are paranoid schizophrenics. With Sullivan, it definitely seems like he was a little bit less high functioning than Ted Kaczynski, but with the Zodiac killer mystery, there are so many incidents that deal with blending in states of being and reality, and like having this inability to differentiate between fantasy and reality, to the point where someone is just trying to live out and act out these fantasies from their twisted imagination. And that really seems like someone who is not exactly in a very strong state of mind. So that is something that I've thought about a lot more. Our next comment comes to us from Jamie Hendrickson, who says, if Ross Sullivan is the Zodiac, he became awfully familiar with the back roads of Vallejo and Napa within a very short time, 2.5 years tops. And it's important to note that because Ross Sullivan, as we said, was previously in Riverside and then in Santa Cruz, actually, not even in Vallejo. I suppose it's possible, but I think it seems unlikely when records indicate that he lived in Santa Cruz and a short time in San Francisco. Well, it's definitely possible that someone could become familiar with the back roads of Vallejo, especially Lake Herman Road. This is used as a shortcut in between Benicia and Vallejo, and Richard Grinnell once asked on one of these episodes, like, would I ever do an episode on the geographic profiling of the Zodiac killer? And because of these things that Jamie Hendrickson was just talking about, In terms of geographic profiling, yes, it does appear that the Zodiac is a native Californian. Ross was born in New York, actually, and someone who was definitely had spent a long time in the Bay Area. But in regards to this question about becoming familiar with the back roads, I can give you one possibility, I repeat possibility, on how someone could learn about all these locations within a very short time, 2.5 years. They could have used Mount Diablo as a scouting point. And sadly, I have to cite the wonderful Robert Graysmith as a person who provided that example. Like on Mount Diablo, you would have had ways to learn about the different locations. I mean, that's where the Radiant is set to put, and then you could find Blue Rock Springs Park, as well as Presidio Heights, Lake Berryessa. But an issue with that is that, I mean, it's not even really an issue. It's kind of like an additional component to that theory is some people simply think that the Zodiac was someone who was really into maps, maybe someone who was a little bit obsessive about numbers, and that he would have been following along with maps and cartography. I had to think for a second. It's like, what's that word? It's not cryptography, cartography with map making and such, and that he would have been able to learn about all of these roads very easily. And then if you're dealing with a single perpetrator, then this is someone who first learned about the back roads, then began prowling the back roads to find out where teenagers would most likely go, or people in their early 20s, and they wanted to create somewhat of a mathematical masterpiece that is just filled with signatures and little mathematical clues that would all tie things together. But there's another comment that was left by Jamie Hendrickson that I would like to look at about the Gaviota Beach murders, and I guess we're still answering the question, was that committed by Ross Sullivan? And Jamie Hendrickson says, there is simply no way to know whether this was a Zodiac crime or not, the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. I don't think tying up the victims at gunpoint is a unique enough MO. I think you would need to place the Zodiac in this area to even begin to attribute crimes like this to him. I don't think Bates was a Zodiac crime, so I have no reason to think that he acted outside of the Bay Area. And the only thing I would add to this comment is that there's a little bit more to the MO in regards to connecting the Zodiac killer to the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. Super X ammunition was found in the shack nearby the beach that was used in the crime, and the Zodiac said very clearly in a letter talking about the Lake Herman Road shooting that the brand of the ammo was Super X. And on that show, The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, that I had just watched, if I had any takeaway from that, it is that they went back and they found the lot number. I forget if it was the serial number or the lot number, something like that, and they traced that back to a military base or like a military depot that would have sold things to military personnel. So they really think that the Gaviota Beach murders were committed by someone who was ex-military, perhaps either in the Navy or in the Air Force. And I'm adding in a few other things like that. That was an observation that was made by Michael Cole in his book Zodiac Revisited. But there are a few other things, as well as the by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire that is written on the Halloween card that comes from the Tim Holt Wheel of Death comic. Ed Gaviota, that was an incident that included all of those elements. The victims were shot. They were tied up with rope. Linda Edwards' swimsuit was cut open, and her breasts were revealed. When you read about this, some people are kind of theorizing, was that only done just to simply show that a knife was present and that her swimsuit had been cut with a knife? And then someone tried to burn that shack down at the beach, striking some matches and trying to burn a piece of tarp that was hanging over the door to the shack. So, all of those elements are present by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire. And that Halloween card isn't just saying, hey, I read the Tim Holt comic that had the Wheel of Death on it. Instead, that could actually be a signature revealing something about the Gaviota Beach murders. If that is all alleged, I definitely have to make the bold statement that I am not convinced that the Zodiac Killer ever operated outside of the Bay Area as well. That's when I'm in line with Jamie Hendrickson and this comment here. I'm not saying it's impossible. Especially when we get to the murder of Bree Davis and then Gaviota Beach and then the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. There are similarities between these homicides. But a major problem that I had with that episode that was talking about Ross Sullivan and the Hunt for the Zodiac Killer on the History Channel is they did one of the lousiest tactics in the world, and that is they pulled up some things about the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, and they said, hey, the person tampered with her car. I removed the distributor coil that's all mentioned in the Riverside confession. I tampered with her car. Then they went to the Kathleen Johnson incident, March 22nd, 1970, and they said, oh, the Zodiac also tampered with her car. This is the same perpetrator. That is just pulling pages right out of Zodiac Unmasked and Robert Graysmith's narrative of using the unconfirmed to prove the unconfirmed. You can just read Zodiac Unmasked for yourself, and then you will save yourself the trouble of watching that History Channel episode. Some of the other points, though, that they made about Ross Sullivan that I did not find very helpful is, if you listen to that episode, and you know what, why don't we just play the clip and then we can hear what they have to say in their own words, and then let's respond to it. So once again, this is from The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, Season 1, Episode 2.
Ken, in looking at Santa Barbara, we're seeing connections.
Sal and Ken are investigating a 1963 unsolved double homicide in Santa Barbara, California, with strong links to the Zodiac Killer. And a clear trend is emerging. Connections to the military, the tactical style of the Santa Barbara kill, ammunition purchased at a nearby military base, indications of cryptology training, and military boot prints found at multiple crime scenes. In light of this new evidence, they revisit their prime suspect, Ross Sullivan.
Ross Sullivan had code training. And his appearance, his army boots, his coat.
Can we place him in the military?
That's the problem.
But he could be a wannabe military guy.
Absolutely.
So we can't rule Ross Sullivan out until we find more about him. But if we put him in the military or military training,
game changer.
He's up here.
Game changer.
Okay, we're on the same page then.
Okay, and the problem that I have with that type of thinking is that, in short, they pretty much just said, all right, we don't have the evidence that we need, but if we did have the evidence that we need, then the game would have been changed. All they pretty much said is insufficient evidence, and I know it's done in a very dramatic way, and a lot of these shows are very dramatic, and they really get your attention, and sometimes it's not even necessarily done in a bad way. If you go on the Zodiac Killer channel and you listen and watch the episode that they have on Ross Sullivan, you're going to come away thinking that Ross Sullivan was the Zodiac Killer. But you just heard it in that segment. They really have a very strong missing link. The way that some of these homicides were committed, they believe that they're dealing with someone who was ex-military. Where's the record that Ross Sullivan was ever ex-military or had any military training? And if you go through the articles on ZodiacCiphers.com, as I mentioned, Richard and whoever has contributed with him are also trying to clear up some of the myths about Ross Sullivan. And we had an excellent comment come in recently about Ross Sullivan asking the question that after the murder of Sherry Jo Bates on October 30th of 1966, Sherry Jo Bates was attacking her, or she was responding to her perpetrator very viciously, pulling out chunks of his hair, clawing and scratching, and they said that Ross Sullivan did not come to work for 3 days. He didn't show up at the RCC for 3 days. That is something that has been widely shared all across the internet. And was this Ross Sullivan giving himself the opportunity to let his wounds heal? If he had scratches or small cuts, was he just trying to let the wounds heal so then when he would come back, he wouldn't have any kind of visible scratch on his face? And the things on Zodiac Ciphers that they were talking about is Ross apparently was seen by numerous people after the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. It's most likely that he had an alibi. I'm just repeating some things that I learned from that article, and that no one seemed to have observed any scratches on him. But to go in the exact opposite direction to provide some counterbalance, giving a shout out to Jim Peterson, who left a comment on Zodiac Killer, Riverside Connection, and False Leads here on BBOR. He says that about Sherry Jo Bates and the Zodiac killings, At last, I have found someone who feels the same. I also do not believe that Sherry Jo Bates was a genuine Zodiac killer victim, simply for the fact that I am not convinced. Zodiac did not kill Sherry Jo Bates. Those are Tim Peterson's words. Brian Hartnell's car door should have put that to rest years ago. Good job. And I've asked that question many times on the channel. If Sherry Jo Bates was a genuine Zodiac killer victim, why wasn't her date of death written on the car door at Lake Berryessa? It says 12/20/68 for Lake Herman Road, 7/4/69 for Blue Rock Springs, and then the date of the Lake Berryessa stabbing on the day that was written, September 27th. Why not write 10/30/66? And the people who believe that Sherry Jo Bates is a genuine Zodiac killer victim proposed the idea that from 1968 to 69, this person is attributing the Zodiac personality only to those murders, only to that calendar year. I always say that it's not a calendar year. It's more like a 12-month cycle, like beginning on the winter solstice, more or less, of 12/20/68, 12/21. And after that crime, this person has become the Zodiac killer, and that this could also deal with someone who really isn't very well mentally, and someone who could perhaps be a high-functioning paranoid schizophrenic. But I am definitely not convinced that Sherry Jo Bates was a Zodiac killer victim. I'm also not convinced that Ross Sullivan was the perpetrator, because of some other points that were brought up by Richard Grinnell. Ross was someone who wrote dark and disturbing poetry, and then there's that desktop poem that's found in the RCC library. Well, it's found on the side of the desk, right? Writing dark, twisted poetry doesn't make somebody a murderer. Wearing military boots does not make somebody a murderer. Acting in a bizarre way does not make somebody a murderer. Running around naked outside 2 or 3 years later and trapping a man in a phone booth doesn't make somebody a murderer. Instead, that shows that this is someone who is perhaps dealing with some mental issues. But how does that definitively state that he murdered Sherry Jo Bates, that he committed the Domingos Edwards homicides, and as well as the murders attributed to the Zodiac killer? And I will look at this in a different way after this quick message. We'll do the commercial break now, and please stay tuned, and let's look at some possibilities about how Ross Sullivan could have had some involvement in these crimes and examine the situation from a different angle. Please stay tuned after this. Bum ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum bum bum. At this time, I would like to talk about some of the ways in which you can help Black Box Online Radio. This channel relies on your support, and the best way you can help out is just by listening to some more content. If you like what you hear, you can hit that like button, subscribe, and share with your friends on social media. But I should also say that Black Box Online Radio now has a Teespring page, and there will be some links in the description box. Please feel free to check out some of the merchandise that is available. Almost all sizes and colors are listed. So, you can also help out by going over to the Zodiac Killer channel and watching the documentary series Obsession into Darkness, parts 1, 2, and 3. I was one of the contributors for that, and you can see some other great Zodiac content on the Zodiac Killer channel. And yes, there will be a part 4 of Obsession into Darkness at some point in the future. And for now, let's get back to the show. Okay, hello everybody, and we are back. I said in this segment we were going to talk about the possibility of Ross Sullivan actually being the Zodiac Killer. But on a different Ross Sullivan episode, we have a question that came to us from Lawrence Kane, of all people, who wants to ask the question, do you think the Zodiac was interrogated? And if you're just going to ask me, like out of the blue off the top of my head, I would say no. I do not believe that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac killer. This whole thing about Allen as being interrogated while wearing a Zodiac watch. I mean, there's a difference between being interrogated and simply being questioned. Whoever was responsible for putting this set of murders together in 1968 and 69 may have been questioned by somebody, but actually, like, sitting down in the interrogation room, I personally do not believe that the Zodiac was interrogated. But in regards to Ross Sullivan actually being the Zodiac killer, he would have had the knowledge of cryptography and the ability to compose the ciphers. There are lots of reports of him studying that material. He was also someone who seemed like very involved with creation. Like, if he did indeed create dark, twisted poetry, the Zodiac was heavily influenced by literature, and there are numerous pieces of literature that are referenced, whether it's T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, or in Michael Cole's book, he even brought up how the Zodiac has references to Herman Melville and Moby Dick, and definitely someone who would be on the side of things like that, as well as science fiction, comic books such as Tim Holt and Red Rider. All of those things could be present in the foundation of the Ross Sullivan theory. Now, going on to our next comment and question, we have one here from NPC Porky who says, the Zodiac was a morally insane individual, not mentally insane. Ross Sullivan was mentally insane. I don't think he would have been the person mentally or physically capable in the later years of his life carrying out the crimes and the letter writing. From what I read, it appears he also had an alibi for the night of the Sherry Joe Bates was killed. And as I said, I did just read that earlier on an article at ZodiacCiphers.com that Ross Sullivan was said to have had an alibi for the night that Sherry Joe Bates was murdered. But let's look at the statement here. First, thank you, NPC Porky, for the comment. The Zodiac was morally insane, not mentally insane. For years, I would have agreed with you. I mean, when I first started this YouTube channel and started putting out episodes about the Zodiac Killer, I would have said, absolutely, that's spot on. I even said something very similar in the episode Ross Sullivan Timeline, that I didn't think that the obnoxious incident that Ross Sullivan was involved with, being arrested for running around outside naked and trapping a man inside a telephone booth, was significant of any connection between the Zodiac Killer or not, because I was like, the Zodiac always seemed like he was in control. But then, as I said, if we do look at the possibility of someone being a high-functioning individual with a mental illness, I mean, firstly, I guess even Thomas Viborg Thune, who hosts the Serial Killer podcast, says all serial killers are mentally ill. That is something that he says during every episode, and some are incurable psychopaths, and other people perhaps could who could perhaps see some form of rehabilitation. But I've had somewhat of a reversal on this statement that the Zodiac was morally insane, not mentally insane. It's the high-functioning paranoid schizophrenic angle, or maybe someone has a different type of mental issue that is not coming out all the time. Because I wish I could find the comment that someone wrote in saying, now, Ross Sullivan was a paranoid schizophrenic, and is it possible that he was on and off of his medication, the way that many people in the world are, the way that almost everybody who takes medication is on and off their meds at certain times, and that perhaps he could have had the obnoxious episode. I mean, that's just simply what I call it. It's not exactly that's not really any type of medical terminology. I'm being very clear. I shouldn't even say that anymore. It's the incident where he's running around outside naked, trapping a man in the telephone booth and being arrested. That type of incident could have happened when he was either taking his meds improperly, off his meds, or something to that nature. And Biff Grimes would like to weigh in on this by saying, I'm not saying Ross Sullivan is the Zodiac, but I would not rule him out because of his erratic behavior. It could depend on the level of mental illness that happens at the time, and it could depend on the level of mental illness that happens at the time. Many people with mental issues can function very well, but there are times that sadly the illness is in some form clearly not at all. If observed, it can be treated and overwhelm them. Okay, so excuse me for jumbling a few of those words, but I think you can get the idea there. And our next comment comes to us from Super Strike 9, who says, Ross is a fairly interesting suspect, but I don't think he's the Zodiac. I think the Zodiac isn't any of the known POIs or suspects. I'm unsure about Thomas Henry Horn's Zodiac hoax theory. I tend to disagree with it. Well, I mean, I think we've said enough about the hoax theory on this channel. I mean, that just came in on a Ross Sullivan episode, so I would, want to keep going here on the Ross Sullivan material. Now, this has got a comment that's written only in segments, so you're going to have to bear with me. It is from MT Doothit. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Douthit, MT Doothit. Ross Sullivan was ruled out for a number of different reasons. Number one, Ross Sullivan can never be placed within 100 miles of the Zodiac crime scene, and even if you're going to look at something much closer, I guess I have to agree with that, because for 1968 and 1969, Ross's life is somewhat of a blur, but then he is mostly been attributed to Santa Cruz, not San Francisco. Although we did read that comment earlier that said for a time Ross was in San Francisco, but the next thing to say is, look at what we said about Gaviota, closer to Santa Barbara. At that time, Ross should have been in Riverside, California. Number 2, on this is on the list of MT Doodhit's list about the reasons why Ross Sullivan is not the Zodiac killer. Number 2, Ross Sullivan had an alibi for the Riverside killing of Sherry Jo Bates. Number 3, his prints did not match the killer's prints. Sherry Jo Bates's car was disabled, and obviously this individual got his hands greasy and left greasy prints on her car, and those did not match to Ross Sullivan's. I'm not sure the source of that, but Ross Sullivan's prints didn't match the Presidio Heights prints, which are 100% Zodiacs. Oh, I have to just interject right there. I mean, there's an enormous debate about that. That are those prints actually the Zodiac killer's prints? I mean, I think that is even uncertain at this point. Number 5, Ross had an alibi for Lake Berryessa. I'm not sure about that. As we said, mostly in well, I mean, there is possibly the thing about how Tahoe 27 interviewed a member of Ross Sullivan's family who said that they have a private reason about why Ross Sullivan is not the Zodiac killer, but they don't want to reveal it. Okay, I mean, if you want to say that. And then Ross Sullivan said, number 6 is Ross Sullivan was also 6'2", 300 pounds. He clearly doesn't fit the witness descriptions. Most of the comments that I received on the channel about Ross Sullivan have been about Ross's weight. And I did bring up that thing from the Zodcast earlier about how Ross Sullivan was 300 pounds at the time of the arrest. It was reported in like those police logs that they put out in the newspaper. I think mine was called the sheriff's log when I was growing up. But there's the police log article about how this individual, Ross, Mercer Stephen Sullivan, was arrested and for running around naked and trapping the man inside the telephone booth. And at that time, he weighed 300 pounds, and the footprints at Lake Berryessa were from someone estimated around 200 to 220 pounds. As far as being 6'2", there was another comment that came in about how you might miss a few things, but it's very difficult to miss 6 inches off of a person's height. The same way that if someone is 5'6", you wouldn't say that they're 6 feet tall. If someone is 6'2", would you refer to them as 5'8"? I'm 5'8" actually, and I've never once been mistaken for being 6'2". So when you see these things about how maybe someone has witnessed someone who's 5'8", 5'9", maybe Ross is too tall to be the Zodiac, as well as too big. I mean, I think we've covered the issue on some other episodes about being 300 pounds. I mean, some guy just wrote in very clearly saying that he weighs 290 pounds, but you can't tell by looking at him that, he is not flabby. He's a big guy, but you cannot immediately tell. Someone can be 300 pounds and not be very bulky. I think that is important to say. And someone left a comment on my episode once, and I don't have that one in front of me, or else I'd give that person a shout out. But they were saying Ross didn't weigh 300 pounds until he died in 1977. And I was, at first I thought about that for a second until I found that episode of the Zodcast. But I think what that person was referring to is that Ross Sullivan was described as being morbidly obese in 1977, but he did weigh 300 pounds in the 1960s, and he died in 1977 as the result of an illness that stemmed from complications around morbid obesity, to the best of my knowledge. But you do have a perpetrator who is 6'2" and 300 pounds, and this isn't about the murder of Sherry Jo Bates even. This is about Ross Sullivan being involved with these Zodiac killer crimes. But I do think that he would have had some of the knowledge involving comic books and literature, right? But another issue that I have to argue against is that Ross Sullivan seems like someone who would not have had the propensity for mathematics. I mean, Gareth Penn has this whole book, Time 17, as well as another book called The Second Power, looking at all of the mathematical signatures in the Zodiac killer mystery, and a lot of them are alleged. A lot of them are just possibilities. But I would like to just share that by saying Ross Sullivan didn't seem to have a strong background in mathematics or anything like sciences, mechanical engineering, anything of that nature, and that's something else that is also missing. And as you can kind of tell from this episode, it appears that I do not think that Ross Sullivan was the most likely culprit in not only the Zodiac killer mystery, but the murder of Sherry Jo Bates and the Gaviota Beach murders. But let's look at something about this here. We have a comment that came in to us from Yasser Abdoun, who wrote, I understand that family matters are very sensitive and a touchy and emotional subject. However, this 51-year-old serial killer case has been plagued by wild allegations such as the involvement of D.B. Cooper and hoax theories, etc. Therefore, skepticism should not be considered a sign of disrespect. And this came in on our most recent Zodiac Mondays episode, Zodiac Killer Merchant Marine Theory. There's also the first draft of it is out, called Zodiac Merchant Marine Theory First Cut. But that sentence really stood out to me. Therefore, skepticism should not be considered a sign of disrespect. And I really do appreciate Yasser for putting so much integrity into that comment. So I would have to take the hard stance and say that I do not believe that Ross Sullivan was the Zodiac killer. He definitely doesn't match any of those witness descriptions about being 6'2", 300 pounds. That's quite different than someone who is even being 6 feet tall and 200 pounds. And it's the thing that really kind of tips it over the edge is when the forensic estimations are that you're dealing with a perpetrator 200 to 220, and Ross is weighing 300 pounds at that. He could have learned, he's weighing 300 pounds at that time. I mean, he could have lost a certain amount of weight and gained a certain amount of weight going here and there, but I do not really think that Ross matches any of the physical descriptions. He has facial similarities to the composite sketch, the most famous one, absolutely undeniable. And if you ever go and find that video on YouTube about how they're saying, what would the Zodiac sketch have looked like in real life? It's a near perfect match to Ross Sullivan, the hairline, the jawline, all of that, sure. But in terms of his physical stature and his body type, he is a little bit too large to be the Zodiac killer. And the second thing, as we said, education levels. I don't think he would have had the education for that. And there are all of these things about how Ross has an alibi for the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, and he can't even be placed, you heard that comment, within 100 miles of the Zodiac crimes on the days that they occurred, because for the majority of what we know is that he was in Santa Cruz at the time of the Zodiac crimes. Like, definitely, like, I think in Lake Herman Road he would have allegedly been in Santa Cruz. So whereabouts, physical descriptions, education levels, all of these things are pushing me to think that Ross Sullivan was not the Zodiac killer. And what's my favorite line on this channel? Longtime BBOR listeners will know this. What's my favorite line? Being weird is not a crime. All I can see is that Ross Sullivan was a big, weird, awkward guy, and that doesn't make him a murderer. And credit to ZodiacCyphers.com for just laying out all of those things, like writing dark and disturbing poetry. I mean, granted, you should suspect somebody of involvement if you find a creepy poem on a desk and this guy wrote creepy poetry. Oh, you can suspect them, absolutely. But based on that alone, insufficient evidence to say that somebody was a murderer. But at this time, I would like to turn it over to you. What do you think about Ross Sullivan as the Zodiac killer? Do you believe that Ross Sullivan has any involvement with any of these murders? And mostly we talked about Gaviota Beach, the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, as well as the Zodiac murders from 68 to 69. I would just like to add one point that almost slipped my mind. Someone had left a recent comment about how the Timex watch that was torn off the perpetrator at Riverside, like we're talking about the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in 1966, she grabbed the person's watch and it was torn off. And that this watch band, the wristband on the watch, was 7 inches long, and they thought that that would have been too small for someone of Ross Sullivan's size. But I just wanted to throw that in there. But as I said, turning it over to you guys, what do you think about Ross Sullivan as a Zodiac killer suspect? What do you think about Ross Sullivan as the murderer of Sherry Jo Bates, or having any involvement with the Gaviota Beach murders? Those are the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. Please drop your ideas in the comments section below. I would love to read any of your responses. And as you heard, this was a topic that was suggested by one of the listeners. If you have something that you would like covered on the channel, please put that in the comments section as well. And I will see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.